Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. As you noticed, we're not in the studio today. We're here at Octopus Energy. I'm joined by Greg Jackson, CEO and founder. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. And great to have you here as the world begins to just trickle its way to opening up again.
It's so nice to actually be in a room with human beings.
A very well ventilated room.
Very well ventilated.
Tested and vaccinated.
Don't tell us off as well. Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, look, I'm 49 years old. I've been a career entrepreneur since I left Procter & Gamble aged mid-20s. And, I guess today, I'm the founder and chief executive of Octopus Energy, which is 5 years old. We've got a revenue of around £3 billion a year, maybe $3.5 billion US dollars, growing, 50%-ish year on year. And we are really at the forefront of driving the movement towards renewable energy, faster and cheaper than I think anyone imagined. Really importantly, making energy cheaper, because it's a critical part of everyone's lives, whilst making it greener. I think that's incredibly exciting. That is my life ambition.
Amazing. Underway. And to be honest, anyone who lives in London, you can't get away from the brand. Everywhere I go, online, on the underground, Octopus Energy, your brand's really taken off, and you've taken quite a unique approach. It's quite a fresh approach in the energy area, let's say.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, obviously we're going to talk about HR and things like that, but part of the way we organize our company is really given our marketing team the freedom to create that brand. And I think, for example, I think we only employ 13 or 14 people in the marketing function. And by the way, we don't use, for example, external ad agencies. It's all
you don't?
No, it's all our TV
all
ads.
In-house. Wow, they're doing a great job then, yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
Everything you see is being designed and created in-house. Even the
merch.
Even the merch, yeah. So, these cups and
we've got the octopus on the floor.
All designed
Bring them in.
We've
got one of these, which is my daughter's now new favorite at home that she sleeps with. She's obsessed now. Now she can't go to bed without one. So you definitely got fans there already.
Yeah, well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, we've put a lot of work into it, and you make a friendly octopus. So big eyes, smiley mouth, eyebrows nicely up there. So there's like the short tentacles. It's all designed, by this incredible team we've got. And I think that really is, in a microcosm, the way that, we kind of set up a company where people are able to deliver these outstanding results incredibly efficiently and hopefully with happiness.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sure everyone listening is looking at the title of this, which is why my billion-pound company has no HR department. You got a lot of heat from, I think, the last BBC interview as well. Tell everyone a bit about the origins of that, and then your feedback that you've been getting since from the HR audience out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we shouldn't mistake not having an HR department.
Yes, that's just clear.
Or not caring about people. Quite the opposite. In a way, everyone in the company, part of their job is HR, right? That's the magic. And neither should we mistake it for thinking that this formula is something that we say every company should do. If a company has a different structure, its HR function may be incredibly important. But I think there are interesting lessons in the way that we've designed this organization. I was talking about marketing there. We talk about HR. We talk about other functions, customer operations, technology, and so on. And the way that we've thought about how we design a company, which, has had the freedom of being built from scratch, based on, in my case, a couple of decades experience of building companies, everything I've learned.
Yeah.
And by the way, amazing experience when I was at Procter & Gamble with an astonishing, inspirational HR director, a guy called Dennis Schuler, who really instilled in me the importance of people. So I think we need to separate the organizational decision and the design from kind of the functional output, and indeed the kind of what we're saying about how we're building this company, but the lessons people can take, for example, that can be applied in other structures.
Yeah. What was the reasoning though? There must have something happened in your career or a moment where you decided to go this direction. What was that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. So the first thing is the fewer departments you have in a company, the more streamlined the company, right? So it also said in that article that we had no IT department.
Yeah.
Now we've got a big tech function. Like we build technology, we license it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're using technology to transform energy. But what we don't have is that traditional function whose job it is to hand out kind of laptops and turn them off and on when they don't work. Now, actually, since then, we now have an IT function for our global organization of 4 people. And really that has been about implementing security standards as we globalize. But I hope it doesn't grow much more, right? And I think part of that is once you have a function in a business, whether it be HR or IT or plenty of others, it does what you wanted it to do, often brilliantly, not always. But it also then starts finding uses for itself. And by the way, it does so in a well-meaning way. There's nothing cynical in this. But, you know, loads of companies will set up a function as they go because they need to perform a certain task. But once they got that function, it starts gathering more tasks. And one way of reducing that is just not to have the function in the first place. I think the next thing is having this idea that one of the greatest weaknesses in many companies is an absence of leaders. Like time and again, when I speak to business leaders, they're saying like how hard it is to kind of cascade leadership down the organization. So what we wanted to do was grow an organization of leaders from the beginning. And that means when we recruit people, we want them to be not just delivering the job, you know, the kind of the technical commercial job they've been hired to do, but actually leading people. And to do that, we give them the full responsibility, including what might traditionally have sat within an HR.
Give me some examples of what would typically sit with those managers that would typically sit with HR.
Yeah, so most of the job of recruitment. Now, actually, we have a couple of specialist recruiters who are brilliant people and know where to advertise and things like that. But it is the job of the function to do its recruitment. It does all its kind of holidays. It does all of its salaries, job titles, handling employment issues,
training,
all of that sits within functions, right? And different functions solve it differently. And sometimes within a function, different bits of that function solve it differently, and that's cool. The insight for me really on that came from, when you start businesses, you got a handful of people, then 10, then 20, then 50. You don't typically have, for example, HR as a specialism when you employ 20 or 30 people.
Like us, like me.
Yeah, you've got to learn how to do it yourself, right?
Yeah, we have to. I am HR, or we are all take ownership of it at the moment.
And you know what? Quite often what you see is that can often make very efficient, happy businesses, right? Because you've got leaders who have to take responsibility for their people. Like you have to look after your people, right? Now, that's not to say that in organizations with a strong HR function, that doesn't happen. But there's definitely a lesson in this that says if when you're employing, 10 or 20 or 30 people, you and maybe the managers in that organization have to learn this, why can't you scale that to 100, 200, 300 people, 500, or where Octopus is today, 1,500 people globally, right? And I think the interesting thing when you think about it like that is you start creating this world in which people have to take responsibility for everything they do as a manager and as a leader. They can't parcel off the problems. They can't let the problems build up. They can't say it's someone else's issue. It's theirs.
Which is one of the things that does frustrate HR leaders is they do want their managers to take more ownership. You've obviously gone to the extreme on that. On that point then, what resources, training do you provide them to help them? Because I know as a manager early on in my career, having those additional responsibilities that you're discussing would be pretty challenging.
Well, yeah, how did you do it?
I just winged it, if I'm honest. I'll be honest, I didn't have any training. I just did what felt right. I just kind of managed people the way I wanted. I treated people the way I wanted to be treated. Although I was in quite an old school kind of Wolf of Wall Street type environment, kind of leading with empathy and just chat with the team. How are you? But meaning it, not just, how are you?
Meaning it, right?
Yeah, but meaning it, not just, for me, I had a really bad experience with my previous manager. So I did everything that he did. I did the opposite. Some of my best friends who are actually in the room behind this camera now worked with me in that previous company, and we're here together. And I say that's because we're just human, human with them. That everyone has a bad day. So I had no training along the way. I did what felt right, if that makes sense.
And if there's an issue arises, what do you do?
I just kind of research. I could look it up and learn. Google exists. Google exists. YouTube exists. Or I turn to some people that are trusted advisors. That I have and mentors and ask for their advice. So there's always a way.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we kind of train people to do, which is ask, learn, ask questions, but start from the basis that it is your job to make sure that your team are happy and productive, right? and to really care. And we employ people who care, right? And then, you know, if issues arise, then they can go hunting for answers. And by the way, different people get different answers. One thing I love about not having a monolithic function is, for example, if they need to get advice, we have one or two external consultancies, in fact, HR consultancies, and they can ask them, or they can ask.
Yeah, people asked that in the chat, actually. Yeah. A lot of people in the LinkedIn article that was discussing this was, I wonder if they do outsource HR. So do you outsource HR?
So it's not that we outsource HR, but we have a relationship with consultancies that do a couple of things. So, for example, help with contracts.
Okay, right? Yeah. You don't want managers just making up contracts.
No, exactly, right. And you know, increasingly we'll do the admin of that internally. Now we've grown to a certain size, and that's done within the finance function. But I think one interesting,
like employment law, for example, you probably outsource that.
Yes, employment law. I mean, first of all, you know, we've got a lot of senior managers, right? And questions can cascade up, and people can reach out to external providers of advice. The interesting thing about that is, it means that we are not stuck with whatever the advice of our particular function is. Actually, you can get a wider range of advice. You know, you can even weigh up different opinions.
Yeah.
And I think as managers, that teaches you to make better decisions, because instead of just like being spoon-fed, you have to think about it. And so I think culturally, it creates a grown-up organization. But by the way, this is not an attack on HR.
I know, yeah. I just want to favor one, because that was how it came across, I think, when the article first came out. And obviously people take the headline, right?
Yeah, exactly. and
they take the small little headline, and all of a sudden it kind of blows up online.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think the big question really becomes, some of the best HR leaders, you know, are asking those questions about how do you create organizations of leaders? How do you create organizations that can scale rapidly whilst maintaining culture?
Yes.
Right? And if there are lessons from organizations like this, they can be implemented in a more traditional organizational structure. And that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, look, this isn't all, what do you call it, kind of hermetically sealed. You know, a lot of the experience that we've used to build this is by looking at those organizations and learning from them. You know, I've learned so much from great HR leaders like, you know, Dan Schultz I mentioned earlier. We just organize differently.
Different way.
Yeah.
And do you think a company that's set up traditionally could shift to this model, or is it too difficult? If you're like a Unilever or a company that already has a traditional HR setup, do you think it's too late to move? Yeah.
So the first question is, I don't think you need to ditch a department when you've got it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, part of this was about saying across a whole load of functions, we will make for a more efficient, more agile, rapidly growing organization if we have fewer functions, right? That was a decision we made. But companies have got those functions and they're functioning brilliantly. Yeah, and you mentioned companies there, and you know, there's some with outstanding HR functions. Yeah. I mean, brilliant. They should work out how to capitalize on the strengths they've got. A part of it comes down to what kind of leaders do you have. So, you know, we had the opportunity to build, you know, this company. I talk about this concept of tower craning, which is the, have you ever seen how a tower crane builds itself?
No.
Right? They're amazing.
Actually, no, I've never seen that.
They're amazing. Right? So a tower crane, they move the first section onto site and they clamp the crane on.
Yeah.
The crane goes up the first section. And it grabs another section, pulls it into the middle. They clamp it on, and then the crane goes up.
Oh, so it travels up itself?
It travels up itself.
I didn't even know that.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way that when you're building an organization from scratch, you can do that. So building from scratch, what we've been able to do is build rounded leaders and then keep elevating them. In fact, they elevate themselves, and then they backfill with more rounded leaders.
Yeah.
And that makes this more possible. But, you know, if you've got a CEO and a leadership team and a kind of executive committee that are not massively people oriented, you need a great HR function, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it might be more a case of how does the HR function enable a more rounded management team, right? And I think that is a great question.
What's the initial reaction from leaders that perhaps have worked in a traditional setup, but then you've hired into the business?
Yeah. So, you know what, this occurs in other functions too. So I'll give an example. When we hired a marketing director from a large corporate, she's a brilliant woman. She said, where do I get sign off for the marketing copy? And I said, well, you don't, you're the marketing director. And she said, what about legal? And I said, well, are you saying anything in there that is intended to mislead? You're saying anything close to the edge? Is it likely to be illegal? She said, no. And I said, fantastic. In that case, you're signing it off, right? Take responsibility.
That must have been really refreshing at the same time, though, for her to be like, oh, wow, I have to go through all of these hoops just to sign off a piece of work. I'm the CMO. I should be able to make that decision.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. So I think that example to me helps kind of show how it's an organization-wide approach, right? And then the question becomes like, if you're writing something where you're not sure, maybe, there's kind of a load of regulatory complexity, then go and seek help. Yeah. It's your job to seek the help rather than have to get everything signed off just in case. And we take the same approach with HR. So, when people join, they'll say, how do I hire people? You're like, well,
hire them.
Yeah. I mean,
you hired them and you trust them to do that job.
Yeah.
If you have to kind of look over their shoulders, like, why are you hiring me? And that's something that I experienced when I first started this company. It was like so refreshing that myself and Shane could just run. If we have an idea, we can run, and within literally a day, we could execute it and roll it out. There was no sign off, no legal, no jumping through hoops. And it was just like, wow, we can move so fast and innovate and grow the business super fast.
I bet you take serious responsibility for it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's on your shoulders.
If it goes wrong, it's on me.
Yeah.
Or anyone here. We let them. And the thing is about that, though, is that it just creates engagement in the organization as well. You feel empowered. You feel motivated to do your job because, that's what you're hired to do. Just let me run with it. Get out of my way. Most of the time, I realized in my old company, I was in my team's way. I was getting in their way. And in fact, I was the bottleneck in the organization.
Totally. So, one phrase we use is like hire great people and then let them be free to do great work, because that's what they want to do. Now, by the way, this isn't a free-for-all. It's not some sort of hippie-ish thing, right? If we look at our efficiency ratio, we're about 4 times more productive than rival enterprises in the same sector, in the same space, right? And we're able to move faster. So we're driving the agenda that matters, the global cleaning up of energy. But then, we have a tremendous amount of data, and I guess maybe that helps in a company like ours because we're modern. We've been able to build everything with cloud-based systems. But every Monday morning, we as a management team sit and review a couple of 100 pages of data about the business, right? And it's extremely granular. And by the way, things like, how do we know how we're doing with our teams? Well, first of all, we're in touch with our teams all the time, right? But, it's all open plan, right? Everyone sees everyone. Of course, by the way, in the pandemic is a bit different, but we've learned how to do that. But for example, twice a week, we're doing app-based surveys of our team. Just checking one quick question, how are you feeling? That kind of thing. Yeah. All the results of that are available all the time. So we've got really good, both qualitative and quantitative view of how we're doing. And the same applies by on commercial metrics, customer growth, customer satisfaction, complaints, loads on people. And I think what that does is what we try to do is maintain this really direct relationship between, the top management of the business and really what's going on. So it isn't that we have this kind of crazy approach and then just trust it and we've got problems lining up waiting to happen. Yeah. The assessment of that is incredible. In fact, today, actually, in our, we're currently present in 6 countries. We've got a revenue of, I said over £3 billion, $3.5 billion. And yet, in our management meeting this morning, we talked about the fact that there were 6 people who had left in the last month within a function. And we wanted to understand what was going on there. And I think that's the degree of care we have because it's not parked off with someone else. Yeah.
One of the questions that I got when I told a few of the HR leaders that I'm doing this interview is they said that on LinkedIn, it does seem you have HR employees though, right?
Yeah, I thought, you know what,
you knew this was coming, right? So how do they feel about this?
Yeah, first of all, I thought it was very funny because, you're out there saying, we've got no HR department, whatever the phrase was. And rather than people, that's interesting. They want to prove that you're a liar.
That's the first thing they do. Right. Of course, you're on LinkedIn, that's the first people who, let me have a look at their HR.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's quite funny that's the, anyway, it doesn't matter, right? But there's a couple of things. First of all, these are people we employ, right? And I'm glad you asked about how they feel because I actually had to, I saw what was being said on Twitter and less on LinkedIn, going like, about these people. I was like, we're talking about actual people who care and do a brilliant job, right? And I spoke to them and said, like, how would you like me to address these questions? We had a really good open conversation. But look, first of all, I mean, one of them that's got the most obvious HR title is someone who joined us through an acquisition. And we acquired a company. They had a great guy doing a great job. So we kept him. He works within the finance function. There is no HR department, right?
So there is no HR department.
There is no HR department, right? There's no HR director. There's no head of people. There's no personnel. I mean, whatever you call it, right? But for example, he's a great guy. Yeah. And he it does
It's a
quite
wealth
a lot
of knowledge
work.
there as well. You can tap into if you need to.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, what's really important is he does a really good job helping within the finance function look after the administration of the very large group of people we employ. By the way, I should say that we employ about 1,500, 1,600 people globally.
Yeah.
And that's grown 50% during the pandemic, right?
50%.
So we employed, I know, sort of 700-ish going into the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It's now 1,600 globally, right? So it's grown 100%, sorry, right?
With no HR department.
No HR department. And then there's a couple of people who are recruiters,
Yeah.
right? And now interesting, amazing people, by the way, incredibly productive. I mean, look at the speed of growth of just adding people.
I don't even,
Right?
yeah, it's crazy.
But they worked for an outsourced recruitment company, and they loved working with our company so much they asked if they could work directly.
Nice.
And so we talked to the recruitment
And typically
company
recruiters in those companies are a lot more like self-driven and a lot, no disrespect to anyone else, but they're a lot more entrepreneurial as well. And because it's quite a fast-paced kind of sales environment, those kind of recruitment companies as well.
Yeah, and
so I'm sure they're used to the speed.
They love the speed, but they're astonishingly good people, so productive. But that was really a great opportunity to take a couple of awesome people that work for us externally and really deliver on the promise for them.
Yeah,
because they were working so much for us. And then I think, for example, there's someone who is down as the learning and space, I think. And he works within operations. It's with one of the functions.
Yeah.
And he's an operations manager, deals with customers every day.
Yeah.
Looks after teams. But really, the operations function wanted to focus a little bit on training and development. And so he takes quite a bit of time out of his day job to do that. And once we got up and running, he'll fold back. But he's still part of operations. And you asked that question about how do you organize training.
Yeah.
That's a great example of how the operations function in the UK decided to do it. And works incredibly well. And in fact, he's got about a dozen people within operations that spend, I think, on average 3 hours a week helping create and deliver training materials. So I think the key here is not having the kind of pyramid function within the business doesn't mean we don't have people throughout the business delivering a lot of that work, just organized differently.
Yeah, or that you don't care. Because a few other comments I saw, not to go too negative, but was how can you not have HR during the pandemic? I saw a lot of comments around I wonder how they're looking after mental health and well-being, for example, of their employees. But I think one of the things we've been talking about a lot of our events, summits, and podcasts, it is those line managers that will take responsibility for all that, for the well-being and having those conversations with their employees as well. If you already have those type of strong bonds, which it sounds like they do, because they're leading it anyway, I'm sure that's actually helped.
It has.
Throughout the pandemic.
We'll talk about a couple of those. So, first of all, have a look at Glassdoor, right? I mean, our rating typically hovers between 4.6 and 4.8 out of 5. Way better than almost any company. I mean, it's so of our scale, right? We have broadly a happy, productive team that are well looked after, take responsibility for delivering results, right, and enjoy the freedom that this environment gives them.
Yeah.
Look at our customers, by the way. They're equally happy, 4.8 out of 5 on Trustpilot. Repeatedly, the only company to be recommended by Which 4 years in a row, like repeatedly delivering great results.
One of my friends I actually met on the weekend, hilarious. He went for a barbecue and he was like, I have to switch to this company called Octopus Energy now. I was saying to the team, literally complete coincidence. I was like, I'm speaking to their CEO on Monday. So yeah, just you definitely have an impact as well.
The reason I put those two together is happy team and happy customers. There's kind of a yin and yang, right?
Yeah.
And we're taking the same, those happy team are delivering those happy customers and vice versa. If we then ask that thing about mental health during the pandemic, for example, if you've got a great HR function, it will have done a brilliant job in that pandemic. There are loads of companies whose HR function might not be as good or who are struggling with other topics that the company have thrown at them. Because by the way, loads of companies are like, oh, there's a problem, we'll lob it over the fence at HR. And HR gets...
That happened a lot, yeah.
Yeah, it gets kind of, it makes it harder for it to add value where it really wants to. So, but in a company where the leaders have to take responsibility and have learned to do so, we had so many people put their hands up to help with things like physical and mental health during the pandemic, to have cross-company conversations between different functions. Because, by the way, it affects you very differently if you're sitting in a shared house on the end of your bed, talking to customers 8 hours a day who are not always going to be happy. I mean, during the pandemic, they're losing jobs. Some have got healthy. Some of them, sadly, have had relatives bereaved, right? And we've got people who've got to talk to them during those times And sometimes they're sitting in a shared house where the housemate's doing other stuff. Sometimes they're literally alone. You've got no colleague to turn to at the end of a call. That's brutal. It's very different than if you're in tech, where frankly, for some of the tech people, the opportunity to really double down on working from home and get this quiet, focused environment is very, very different. And by having kind of cross-company conversations and identifying what kind of support is needed where, and allow the teams to work together or within their specialism, we've had these incredible things. So, for example, we had Octo Kids TV. So we
Tell me more.
So we created a kids TV program for
Really?
2 to 4 hours a day.
Okay.
Throughout the first lockdown and indeed most of the second one, which enabled those that were working from home with kids to know that the kids were getting educational,
for your own
fun entertainment, right? Collectively in a way that was organized for them, right? Responsive to their needs by the company.
Wow.
Right? We set up the listening ear service where we trained, and this was all coming from the team, but we trained, I think like in the end, a couple of dozen people to be a listening ear for those that were having really tough times, both in and outside of work hours.
Yeah.
And our managers have grown enormously in how to handle that very diverse array of experiences people have had, often invisibly during the pandemic. So, I like to think when you create leaders, problems like that, actually solutions arise,
because it's part of the culture.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
And it's what we expect of people, right?
Yeah.
And they've got to take responsibility. They can't say, when is HR going to deliver this thing for mental health? It's like, they can't demand that. They've got to go and do it themselves.
Yeah. And again, I think that is a frustration that we see from the HR department and businesses as well, is they want their leaders to take ownership of it. But obviously we need to provide them the training, the tools that they need. But that's already a part of your DNA. So naturally they're going to want to step up and take ownership.
And I think this idea about spawning leadership, right? I think that can work brilliantly in a company with a strong HR function. I think a lot of your listeners will be, progressive HR thinkers.
They are. They're incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
Not people who think the job of HR is personnel.
No, we've come a long way from there.
Exactly.
If you're still talking about a seat at the table, then you're in the wrong company. Or
and so I think that take some of these and this works whether or not you've got an HR department, right? So by the way, I'm not saying it's perfect. We have things that go wrong.
What are the challenges then? What are the challenges that you've come across in operating in this way? Because I'm sure, again, it sounds great, but I'm sure it doesn't come with about challenges.
I think the first one is look, not just across HR, but in almost any kind of topic, people want to improve their job by creating processes, by creating structures. Time and again, you spot the seeds of a new function, right? And there are so many of them.
Starting to build.
And you have to get people comfortable that that's not the right answer. So one of the things is to stop that proliferation, which naturally occurs, not because people are...
Because it's what they're used to doing.
It's what they're used to doing, and they're doing the right thing. And it's quite helpful to help people think, like, most process... When I worked at Procter & Gamble, they were amazing stuff. But also, we were drowned in process.
I bet.
It was unbelievable, right?
I bet.
And when I looked at where those processes come from, though, most of them come because one function, in order to smooth its job, is handing a process over to every other function, right?
And back and forth.
Yeah, and so everyone ends up filling in forms for everyone else, right? Or whatever, right? So I think, first of all, it's really helping people understand that although it may seem like a good idea, like optimizing their issue, in the long run, that creates the exact organizations that so far we've been managing to avoid being and don't want to become. I think the second thing is you've got to be very comfortable with heterogeneity, right? So you've got to be comfortable that when I get asked, how do you make sure X, right? It's like, well, I can't. I have to trust people, right? Now, don't get me wrong, we've got tons of data. We spot problems emerging, but we can't stop them happening, right? Because the first sign there's a problem is the outcome of the problem. Whereas in a lot of companies, what you try to just prevent a problem, right? And it's hard to get used to that. And you do absolutely have to be ready to spot emerging problems, because what we can't afford to do, we've got to keep the ship on the rails, right? Is that a mixed metaphor? Don't know. Anyway.
Kind of.
Yeah. So I think there's a few things like
the ship on the rails. Yeah.
And there is one which says, like, some functions and some pockets of the business are, kind of more bureaucratic and others are more agile. And of course, if you're letting people self-determine, some of them will choose those paths, and we have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah. There's a story I don't want to forget to ask you, because which stood out to me. It was a personal incident that you mentioned when you was managing a manufacturing business in North London, and it was a conversation you had with an employee. You know what I'm referring to? Yeah, there you go. Can you tell that story? Because I thought it was pretty interesting, and I know was something also which sparked this thinking, right?
Yeah. So I just left Procter & Gamble a year or two earlier, and maybe more recently. And you know, I was used to the management training you have and how you deal with any situation. I was full of confidence and all that stuff. And anyway, I was running this manufacturing business in North London, and Tina, who was the receptionist, also did customer service, looking after the retailers that were our customers. And I was walking through reception, and I heard Tina on the phone to a customer, and you know, I kind of leaned in just to give her a couple of tips on how she might handle the situation. And anyway, Tina carried on the conversation, consummate professional. She then put the phone down, and she gave me this death stare, right?
And you were the CEO at the time?
I was the CEO, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I was, yeah. And she gave me this death stare, and she said, forgive me for the language here, you might have to beat this, right?
No, it's fine.
But she said, for fuck's sake, Greg, right? And this is about 9 or 10 people in reception. You don't have to tell me what to do. She said, I was in this company long before you, and I'll be here when you're gone. She said, I love this company, all right? And then she said, and I bring up 2 boys and an unemployed husband on the poxy wage this company pays me. And by the way, you know, we'd only just taken over the company, and definitely that was a fair criticism. But she said, if I can do that, and I love the company more than you, I don't think you need to tell me what to do. And
oh man,
there was this kind of silence. The whole room went silent.
I bet they're like, oh my God. I bet
yeah.
like, what?
And I was silent, and then I realized that she was right. And you know, in my memory, we hugged each other, and I kind of at that moment realized that every person who's making ends meet in today's society is, you know, able to get a mortgage, or, you know, help bring up kids, running communities and churches and social clubs and sports and all the things that people do outside of work. If they can do that, they can do pretty much anything a company wants.
It's true.
And the thing that actually what happens is, like, by the way, I should say, the reason I mentioned the hug is, again, someone said, oh, you know, no wonder, you know, he needs an HR department, he's hugging his staff. And I'm like, first of all, honestly, I'm not sure if that's just a memory or not. Secondly, it was a long time ago. Thirdly, it was definitely appropriate. Fourthly, we can talk about it. I think the lesson there, though, was so extreme. What it taught me was that companies advertise for committed, creative people who want to make a difference. In the recruitment process, you check for that. And then when they start work, so many companies then drown them in process and bureaucracy, and there's a tick box for everything. And in fact, you strip away their ability to be brilliant. And it's no surprise that then, you know, they're not able to add the value they wanted, and that they don't get the fulfillment that they thought they were going to get. And I just think we've got to break those kind of paradigms. That's not to say every company does that. Yeah. But I think we should all be aware of it. And we should be aware of just the awesome capability of most people, and the fact that if you give them responsibility, they want to take it. Yeah.
I'm going to jump into some LinkedIn questions, because I know people will kill me if I don't ask them. So I've got some interesting ones. Where do I even start? So we've got one from Suzanne Lucas. Hi, Suzanne. I haven't seen you in a while. So she's known as the evil HR lady, right, online. So she's like an influencer in the space. So she said, Greg, you say you have no HR department, but you have recruiters, you have an outsourced company, handles paperwork, blah. She literally wrote blah, 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 blah. It kind of sounds like you have a HR department, you're just calling it a different thing.
No, so look, a department has a head, and then a pyramid with people reporting up. Yeah. All the people we've just talked about, they don't sit within a single function. They're throughout the organization.
Throughout the organization.
And by the way, they come and go. Like several things I said, like, you know, for example, the one in ops, he'll be doing that for a bit, and then he'll be back to being an operations manager. He's an operations manager. He just happens to be spending a bit of time on that within operations. Yeah. The whole point is, yes, we have people who do, of course, you have people who do these jobs, but they're within functions, and they're self-deterministic within functions, like they're self-defined. Yeah. They're not, you know, there is no
box they sit within.
Yeah. There's no part of the organogram that's got an HR function. And that's the difference. And part of the reason for that thinking is, once you have a function and it does its job brilliantly, it starts looking for other things to do Like, you know, every function by isn't just,
every function does that.
Every function says, hey, look, we're really good at this. And we see that that bit of the company could do a better job. So we'll go and help them. And in trying to help people, you actually create these kind of complex matrix organizations. And so by not having functions, and this is one, but there are others we don't have, you reduce that complexity.
Yeah. There you go, Suzanne. Thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Another one was basically at some stage, do you, as you know, once you scale exponentially, do you think at some stage you will have a HR department?
That's a great question, right? Because I wouldn't rule it out, right? We will, as we grow, always question, are we structured correctly? Now, by the way, I think it will be a failure of our leadership approach if we do need that. But, you know, if we find that our leadership approach isn't delivering, then we won't just plow on. But for now, you know, we've grown from 0 to, I don't know, 1,500 people across the globe in 5 years. So I think so far we've passed a lot of those milestones where people deem it necessary.
Yes.
But I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah. Do you think that the pandemic has changed people's thinking on this approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think certainly for me, I've always been a very visual manager. You know, I love walking around and seeing how people feel and interact.
You've been here the whole time, by the way, because you haven't stopped through the pandemic. That's correct.
Yeah, I came in the office every day because we've got engineers who have to go in people's houses. And I think if we're asking, you remember the beginning of the pandemic, like no one knew how this disease was going to manifest itself.
No.
Like, as it is a serious, nasty disease that's had a debilitating effect on many people's lives and on our economies. You know, but it's not Ebola, right?
Yeah.
But at the very beginning, like we couldn't stop for a single day having engineers going to people's houses, and before we had testing, before anyone knew. Yeah. Right. And then I thought, if I'm asking people to do that, I'm going to lead from the front. And of course, other people might say, well, leading from the front is actually working from home. I mean, either way you look at it. But because we were saying to those people, we asked people, and we obviously gave them the choice, but we asked people to carry on that really risky bit of the service. I wanted to be with them. And I think as the pandemic progressed, so we, as the government rules allowed, so we kept offices open to allow people who were suffering from mental health issues, loneliness, physical health issues, you know, maybe they didn't have the right environment for working, to be able to come to a place. And yeah, we've got room for about 250 people here.
There's a lot of people here as well.
Yeah. So now, as we're moving into this kind of final stage of ending lockdown,
and also you're a central company, right? So
yeah,
given what you do, you kind of need to stay open.
We could not stop.
You couldn't stop.
And in fact, our service levels didn't change. But I should say, for the vast majority of our team, you know, because we're very cloud-based, the day that the government said, right, you know, we're moving to, you know, kind of people got to move to working from home. All we had to say to our team is take your laptop home and remember to take your power supply with you. And the company carried on.
Don't forget that bit.
No, so the only reason we stayed open was those physical face-to-face, not face-to-face, physical jobs like engineering, and then providing respite for those who needed it.
Amazing. Well, before I let you go, I'm going to jump into our quick fire round. So I asked this to all of the guests. So you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready? Per question. Don't worry. Not all of it. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming an entrepreneur?
Fear of failure, and particularly fear of being judged to be a failure.
I get that. Yeah. What's the best piece of business advice you received?
It's from Tina. It's trust people. Like, if you want to grow a really big business rapidly, it's only going to get grown by the people that you give responsibility to and you can trust them.
Yeah. How would your family describe what you do for a living?
Well, actually, I think my mum's a communist. And so she's very proud about driving down energy costs for hard-pressed households.
Yeah.
She's proud about taking on fat cats, but she's not that keen on the sort of the actual business side.
Yeah, we kind of covered this a second ago, but you know, what are some of the other areas that you keep up to date with current events and your personal development? So you mentioned reading. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I watch an awful lot of YouTube videos actually of great leaders and interviews. Interviews with people like, you know, I mean, obviously people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, but so many others that I think we can learn from. Yeah,
definitely. What's one thing about your business that you're most excited about?
I think that today, look, we've got quite a big business, and yet our market share is about 0.4% of the global market. The opportunity to dramatically grow this company by, you know, today 11% of global energy is renewable, right? So we're going to grow that 8-10 times, right?
Yeah.
How exciting is that?
Yeah, a good reason to get out of bed every day as well. Last question. If we've covered a lot, right? And there's sorry for everyone. There's so many LinkedIn questions. I can't get to all of you as well. I'll ask the team to follow up as well. But if there's one parting piece of advice you're going to give to everyone listening, what would that be? And then where's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to reach out, say hello, and learn more?
Yeah, so Twitter's the best place actually.
Okay.
Rather than LinkedIn, just because I think there's so much spam on LinkedIn now, right? Sadly, not criticism by the way, hello LinkedIn, just to say that we talk about some controls on that. But I think Twitter's a great place to reach out.
It's like a snapshot, right? It's easier for you to get to it as well.
But my biggest advice is talk to customers. I think every function in a business, talking to customers and understanding, finding a way to talk to them regularly. It's not visit a call center once or whatever your equivalent is. It's how do you stay on the pulse of your customers? Because ultimately, I think that's the leading indicator for what's going on in your company.
Amazing. And what's your Twitter handle?
At G__J, 2 underscores.
We'll put that in the comment section for everyone else to get. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And thank you for having us here. It was nice of us to get out of the office. And for everyone, we made it happen. We had a lot of requests. It's funny because the team reached out and we were like, we were going to reach out to you. So it was meant to be. And for everyone who's listening, please like, comment, subscribe, follow Greg on Twitter. Check out Octopus Energy. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and your week. And we'll see you again soon.